Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Live Since You Asked with Pete Collins, St. John's Prep class of 1996 and the Global Director of Corporate and Financial Communications at Spotify. Thanks for taking some time to be with us today, Pete. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Hardman. Appreciate it.
We've been doing this really since we went remote. So we've been going about 7 or 8 weeks now with different people, and it's been fun to talk to people in different industries and different worlds. Can you talk a little bit, Pete, about your prep experience and kind of what has stayed with you? I know you were part of the state championship soccer team in 1994, but what else has stayed with you, and what have been the positive parts of your time?
Yeah, I think it's a good segue to kind of, I feel like one of the biggest things I learned at the prep was around working on a team, whether that be on a group project or on a soccer team or hockey team, working together, finding the right team with the right skills. Everybody's good at something different, and I think that was really beneficial to me. I think also just the foundational knowledge around problem solving. I work on problem solving, issues management every day in my role, and I feel like that is something that the prep built a nice foundation for me. And then I think that leadership piece too, in terms of how do you lead a team, and the experiences that I had both academically and on the field as well.
Sure. Do you still stay connected with guys from St. John's from your class?
Yeah, I do. A lot of them were pinging me. We actually have a Slack channel with I stay in touch with several guys, Matt Coyden, Ryan Gillis, John Henry, Ben Trombley, Pete Ray, Pat Russo, who's actually overseas right now. So we've been doing some Zoom calls, and I really stay in touch with and that's another thing that the prep, I think, built, for me, is those close friendships that we've continued to kind of stay together and offer advice to each other along the way. So, it's been great to have those guys on board and to keep in touch with them.
That's awesome. The brotherhood stays even through Slack channurs. That's a good way to stay connected. That's awesome.
That's right.
Can you tell us, Pete, about your work at Spotify? What your days are like, what your main focus is in the work that you do?
Yeah. So in my role, I'm the global head of corporate and financial comms. So I'm really the kind of lead corporate storyteller. It's a functional role, so we have functional roles and market roles. I report up into Chief Communications Officer, I actually work on our financial narrative, building that out for our earnings, our quarterly earnings call. We had that one on April 29th, so we had some good earnings there, so help with all the messaging, all the prep for our executives leading up into earnings. That's one element. Also, if we are announcing any sort of key M&A activity, we just acquired several different podcast companies, and any sort of strategic communications plans around that. I recently led, we filed a complaint in the EU against Apple for anti-competitive behavior. So I kind of helped with the development of a communication strategy around that announcement, which was very delicate. And do things like CFO visibility. One of my key internal stakeholders is the CFO of Spotify. His name's Paul Vogel, and he's new. Our old CFO, Barry McCarthy, who took Netflix public, he actually just stepped onto our board of directors. So Paul's not new to Spotify, but new to the role. So it's been really interesting to kind of start to lay the groundwork and foundational work to build up his profile, and that's been part of my recent job, recent roles and responsibilities. I'm also kind of on the front lines of issues management. So if there's something going on, or we hear about something around fraud or those sorts of things on the platform, I'm usually the one that's developing a a response to that, and getting that working on a cross-functional team with legal, corporate development, those sorts of things.
Sure.
And being a media spokesperson as well. So
Okay.
I interface with the media quite a bit, with the national business and financial media, I'd say the most, but and tech media. So that's kind of the general roundup
Sure.
of what I do.
How did you get to this point? What were the different job experiences and school experiences that prepared you to be where you are today?
Yeah, I most recently was at Papa John's International, and it was definitely quite a different experience, from being at Spotify, and kind of some similarities, some differences. They're the number three global pizza chain, and they had a founder. So does Spotify. I think I went through a lot of reputation management in terms of there were some major executive issues or founder issues down there, and I think that helped prepare me in understanding how to deal with a crisis, and how to respond to that. And I think that's part of what Spotify liked about my experience, was more around the corporate and crisis work that I had done at Papa John's, and the fact that I had worked, at a founder-based company, which Spotify is as well.
Sure. One of the things, Pete, we've talked about with different people that have been with us is we've had a lot of startup people. So they're, a little different than Spotify, a much bigger company, but they've talked a lot about agility. And, you just referenced that, the crisis communications with Papa John's, and kind of what you're doing now. How does agility play a role in what you're doing, and kind of how do you kind of jump from situation to situation, while at the same time staying focused on kind of the core focus and the core values of what you're trying to share out as you move forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of balls in the air at any time. With especially with the corporate job, corporate communications, because and I think typically the issues management piece is something you're going to prioritize, because if you do not directly deal with that in an urgent manner, something it could become a bigger issue.
Sure.
So I would say you just got to think about, when you're talking about agility, to in prioritization, to think about what could happen in 3 days down the road here, based on something that may not look like an issue today. And I also think some of those bigger kind of moments or tentpole activities that are happening are things you need to create a lot of focus on, and spend a lot of time on. So there's a lot of we call it the bet board, but there's specific strategic bets within Spotify that certain groups are responsible for. So if you're, say, on the podcast bet team, and you're in the policy and governance working group, and that has a fraud component, and that's something that the chief legal officer is really focused on, and thinks that's one of the most important initiatives at the company, then you're going to kind of prioritize that work. I think you're also, there's dependencies, so you're working with other teams as well. So sometimes you may be waiting on an answer on something, and you move on to something else. So to get that assignment done. So there's a little bit of a, when you talk about agility, that's how I kind of view that.
Sure. No, that's really helpful. I mean, it's not an easy word, because sometimes we all like things pretty stable and certain, and today that's not happening today in any shape of the world. How is what's happening with COVID-19? How is that impacting your work at Spotify, and what's happening at Spotify in general?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think we're dealing with the same thing as everybody. The office, I'm working the 4 World Trade Center office in New York, and that's been the office has been physical office has been closed since early March, and You know, we're going to be definitely out until early June at the earliest back to the office, if that. But so I think first and foremost, we're looking at, you know, safety and security of the employees and making sure everybody's comfortable and has what they need to kind of do their jobs at home as well as possible. I think because it's a tech company, we are used to kind of working remotely, and it's a global company. So we have, you know, we always are on Hangouts with Stockholm or Asia or wherever. So I think we're kind of used to video conferencing on Google or Zoom, and I think most people you know, can access what they need to access to kind of do their jobs. I think it's a unique company in terms of being a little bit insulated from COVID and the effects. You know, I think, but you know, I think that's kind of generally you know, what's happening. And then, you know, we're really focused on artists too, and the fact that they're struggling right now, and a lot of their income comes from touring. So we started something called the Spotify Music Relief Project, which we're matching up to $10 million. We have a bunch of partners like Music Cares, so to give back to the musicians and music community. And we also have something called the Artist Pick, where they can, on their profile pages, can include a charity of their choice, or if they want to raise funds for themselves or their crew members or that sort of thing. So I think we're trying to do things that that use the platform in a positive way. We've also given up, you know, given donations to the WHO and CDC foundations, and so for frontline workers, and also used the platform, you know, gave out some ad space for CDC and WHO, and kind of have some information hubs on COVID as well that we're kind of using the platform to broadcast out. So those are a couple things that we're doing.
No, that's great. I mean, that's a big part of what we talk about at St. John's, of how do you use your platform to influence every situation you encounter for the benefit of others. So it's great to see, you know, larger companies like Spotify kind of stepping in and helping people out in different challenges. Knowing what you know now, Pete, where you are, you've got, you know, looking back on high school, what would you have done differently, or what advice would you give to the high school students that are listening today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I was thinking about this question, and you know, it's nothing probably mind blowing, but you know, my personal experience, you know, we had the opportunity to do an instrument at some point, and I'd picked up the guitar, and I don't know what year it was, but I probably did it for a semester and just dropped it. And I was thinking during this whole COVID thing, it would be great to know how to play the guitar, and I've seen people, you know, buying guitars, and I've been tempted to do that. And, you know, given the Spotify connection, it seems like something that could be fun and different to kind of, you know, take up some time. But I think, you know, overall, you know, I don't see a lot of things I would change. You know, I had a great experience at the prep, and I think it really prepared me well for, you know, getting into the college I wanted to get into, which was Georgetown. And, you know, it was my first choice. And I think that was a, you know, the sole focus and goal of kind of my prep experience. At a certain time pivoted to really wanting to get to that place, that next step. So that was kind of, it's my thought there.
That's awesome. That's great. One of the things we've talked a lot with our alumni about is just mentor relationships, and kind of, you know, can you talk about, have you had some mentors that have kind of helped you guide you along the way at different positions, either at Spotify or Papa John or Georgetown, and have you had the opportunity to be a mentor for others as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, also, you know, was thinking about this, and you know, it's interesting because, you know, I think my older brother is actually probably my biggest mentor, and I'm lucky to have that. He's 5 years older than me. He actually he went to another school that I won't talk about. That's not as good as the prep, but you know, so he actually got a job. He was working at a company called Next New Networks, which was purchased by YouTube. So he ended up being at YouTube, and he created the YouTube Spaces, which are for creator spaces that they can use for free, the top 100 creators at YouTube. So I really, when I was thinking about making the move from Papa John's to Spotify, he really helped. I could tap into his knowledge of, YouTube and new media, and kind of Spotify was more in that mind frame and in that zone in terms of industry groups. So I feel like I lean on him a lot. He has a lot of just great advice and experience and
Sure.
in that space. So I definitely leaned into him a lot on that. And
Awesome.
I definitely try to return that favor too to people that reach out to me on LinkedIn, or just to try to put them on the right path, and try to give them a hand behind the scenes, at least to get, say, get a resume, to the right person. Sometimes it's kind of a black box when you're just dropping resumes everywhere. So I think it's helpful to have somebody that can help guide you through that process if you're looking at, for an opportunity. So yeah, that's one person that has really helped me. So
That's
I'm
awesome.
lucky to have somebody like that. So
That's great. We always tell our kids, we have 4 kids, 3 boys and a daughter, and we always tell them, they're going to have each other for life. So they got to kind of find a way to support each other. It's great to see you guys continuing to support each other and encourage each other going forward. That's awesome.
Yeah.
A couple of questions have popped in from a couple of our students. So this is a really hard-hitting question. You might struggle with this one a little bit, but on the Spotify theme, do you have any good playlists that you can recommend for the prep student body from Spotify? They're getting right down into the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah, there's so many there's actually 5 billion playlists on Spotify. So you pretty much find anything you want. I think a lot of the algorithms and things are generated from playlists that are made by people like you and I that have a certain musical taste, and the AI enables us to kind of put those together. I mean, I just put together a playlist called Man of the Hour, and it has like a bunch of alternative music, and that was another thing that was a bit shaped while I was at the prep in the early 90s. It was
Sure.
the Pearl Jams, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Other Worlds, and I created this kind of throwback playlist. But yeah, there's a bunch of different things. If you're on premium, you can access. There's something called Release Radar, which is playlist, that's generated for you personally. That there's new music Friday. So if you have been listening to certain artists, it'll serve you other artists that maybe you haven't heard but are in the same genre. So there's a lot of different things that you can play with there. And the other thing is podcast playlists. So podcast is a big thing for us, and we've made a strategic bet to diversify our kind of revenue model, just outside of music, and to create something unique that can be discovered. So discoverability, discovery is what we call it, is the kind of AI algorithm, and we're trying to apply that to some of the podcasts that are out there. So serving you contextually relevant podcasts that you'd be interested in, that maybe is something similar to, if you like, say, Bill Simmons, maybe it serves you a Barstool Sports, or there's one called Snacks Daily that I really like, that's financially focused, but it's really kind of has a unique spin, and I think they're 20 minutes long. So you can get podcasts that are 5 minutes, like the Hottest Take, Bill Simmons podcast, or you could do Snacks, which is 20, or you could do the BS podcast, which is 2 hours. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities for exploration on the site.
I'm a little disappointed you didn't mention my dad's list, Spotify list that I've created at home, that my kids moan every time I put it on at home. But I'm sure that I have at least 5 followers right now.
It's funny because before I got on here, my 2 daughters, I have 2 daughters and an older son, and my daughters are 8 and 6, and they asked me to put Descendants a descendants playlist on. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but
Yep.
you probably will be soon if you have any daughters that are of that age. So
We've passed through that world. Our youngest is 11 and my daughter's 14. So one of our young alums, Pete, class of 17, is put in a question. Thanks for speaking with us today. You spoke a little bit about teamwork, and he's heard a lot about Spotify's unique style of the agile development workflow that facilitates teamwork. Can you talk a little bit about this for our alum and how Spotify uses it to their advantage?
Yeah, and this is really applicable to the engineering teams, like the R&D teams. There's different missions and different squads that work on these missions, and there's a group of engineers that are put together on a project or one of these bets, like say podcast discovery, and that's a priority to figure out how do we make discovery better with podcasts. How do we serve more contextually relevant content to our users, and I think that squad will be assigned a mission, and they work together to build something as quickly as they can and fail fast and kind of go back to the drawing board. And there's no real, there's some guidelines to it, but they're looking to, there's hack weeks and things like that within these squads to kind of, maybe try to break something or try to make something better. And I think that's where it comes to this kind of agile process where, Daniel Eck, who's the founder, really likes to, and he has he's an engineer, so he likes people to try different things, innovate, fail fast, and kind of move quickly. So I think this is how these teams are structured, and I think it can be applicable to other things. I'd say maybe less so to corporate communications, but I still think we kind of have that agile mentality where each team member knows what their expertise is, and if there's an issue, they know which issue is theirs, and other team members know that, or some people have crossover experience that they could kind of backfill if there's an issue or project. So it makes it a little bit easier to mix and match teams and things like that with folks that kind of know that area. So.
Awesome. You talked a little, in that agile workflow environment. You talked a little bit about like learning from mistakes. A big part of what we're talking about with our students is embracing excellence, but not excellence meaning perfection. Excellence meaning learning from our mistakes. As you look at your journey, have there been some experiences where things didn't go as planned, and you kind of learned from it, and anything you'd be willing to kind of share with the people listening today?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I was kind of going to the way back machine a little bit and going back to my prep days. And, one thing, I was a hockey player, and I had made the freshman team, and then I made the JV team my sophomore year, and then junior year, I thought I was going to make varsity, and I think I ended up being, one of the last cuts. And Coach Zimini, who was the JV coach at the time, he said, "Hey, don't get upset. I'd like you to be, the captain of the JV team. Give you an opportunity." And I kind of debated, whether or not to continue, and I kind of ultimately embraced the opportunity. And, I think it was a really good learning experience for me to make lemonade out of lemons, so to speak, and
Sure.
really embrace that opportunity to lead the team and gain that experience. And ultimately, I think it made me a stronger player, a stronger leader, and I made the varsity team the next year. And I think that was a really big thing for me. I know it's kind of like a sports analogy, but I think
Sure.
a lot of these times you're kind of knocked back potentially, and maybe you're given a little bit of a lifeline, or maybe it's a scenario that you weren't expecting. And I would say just keep open to those possibilities, and I think you can make something really successful out of it.
Sure. No, that's great advice. I mean, the whole challenge is when you get knocked down to find a way to get back up again and move it forward. So that's and Coach Zimini is still coaching for St. John's Prep, so he's still
All right.
around.
One other thing about Coach Emini, the other thing that motivated us was bucket practice. I don't know if you ever heard about that. After losses, some hard skating. So
there you go. A little kinder and gentler today, but when you two hard-hitting questions coming from our middle school kids. One, you spent some time at Papa John's. Are you still a big fan of pizza, being in that environment? And two, what's the most played song on Spotify, or is there data out there that can be shared on the most played song on Spotify?
Yeah. So the pizza question is yes. I love pizza. Love a lot of different types of pizza. I ate a lot of pizza when I was at Papa John's. We actually had a campus store there where you had to work at the restaurant like one day a year. So it was kind of cool to see, how it was like to work in store there. And yeah, I'm still a fan of Papa John's. My kids love it. They have changed up the menu a bit recently, so I haven't tried some of the new stuff they have, but yeah. And then playlists. It's a good question. I don't know the most played song. We probably have that data. We do a lot of data storytelling around kind of different listening habits. So yeah, I know one album that just went on to Spotify and it is The Chronic, which is Dr. Dre. It has never been on Spotify, so that was like a big. I know that's been listened to a lot recently. So
great. So Pete, as we close out our time, as you look back on your journey and where you are today as a really successful communications professional at a great company, for anyone out there who's listening who wants to get into your world, what are the great things about your job, and what are some key steps they should start thinking about right now to get there?
Yeah, I would one thing that I really think is important when looking at kind of different companies that you're interested in is, if you can go listen to the company's earnings call. I know it sounds like super boring and like, why would I ever do that? But it really gives you a really deep perspective on kind of what the business is all about, what the company is doing well, what they're struggling at. It really helps you understand the industry. So I think that's number one. I would encourage you to do that if they're a public company to go ahead and do that. And then the other thing is, if you're looking to get into communications, I think media relationships are kind of the currency of PR people. So those are super important. And, as you go from industry to industry, those folks change. But if you're interested in a specific industry or company, I would see which reporters are covering those and then read some of those stories. So read those stories, listen to those podcasts. That's going to help you get smart on those companies and look really smart if you're going in for an interview, or if you're in, say going to interview in the QSR industry, listen to a few, earnings calls for Papa John's or what have you. So I think those are a couple things that I think are, really helpful, and I think would help you kind of move the ball forward. And then I think also just, the training on, being a good writer, you can always improve writing and presentation skills, and, you want to develop those media relationships as well, or at least an understanding of the media landscape when it comes to these companies. So
that's great. Pete, thanks so much for creating some time. I'm sure with all this going on, you've got a lot happening. Really appreciate you creating some time for St. John's today. And we had a good amount of listeners with some not the hard hitting questions, but some good information that you shared. So I appreciate it. And
thanks
for everybody, you're welcome. For everybody else that's listening, the next edition of Live Since You Asked is on Thursday at 3 with Paul Niehaus, who is the 2020 Distinguished Alumnus of St. John's. He's a professor of economics at the University of San Diego, and has some great work in Africa, raising money and supporting different people in that area. So feel free to tune in there. Pete, thanks again for your time. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Hardman. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.